Widower? A male widow.
Let me see. I'm trying to say widow and a widower.
Widower. That's in English, yeah.
When I was coming up in Bordelon, my young days on the bayou, one of the big nights that I used to love to watch and go, c'était la journée qu'on allait pour célébrer la seconde marée. And can you start again?
Yeah.
When I was coming up in Bordelon, quite a few years back, one of the big nights that we used to have was celebrating the second marriage of the couple. On appelait ça les charivari. Half of the group that was going to the celebration would go up the wire about a half a mile. Et l'autre moitié would go to the other side of the house, about a half a mile away from it. Le monde qui était en bord, la maison disait charivari. Les autres monde disaient pour qui? Then, on avait tout un quelques moyens pour faire du train. Un avait une cloche qu'on mettait sur les vaches. Les autres avaient some kind of pan that we could knock on that and make kind of noise, and there we go. And alors, avec tout le monde arrêtait. L'autre disait, charivari. L'autre bord disait, pour qui? En même temps, on marchait tout près de la maison. Quand on était proche de la maison, on commençait à faire. Bang, 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 gros train. Charivari, pour qui? Louis Marceau et Yvette Grémillon. Tout le cloche de peine. On rentrait à la maison, the couple would be at the door and they say, entrez, entrez. Ils avaient fait du tac-tac. La limonade. On buvait la limonade, tac-tac. On restait 10-15 minutes. On décidait, c'est le temps pour partir. Quand avant de partir, quelqu'un ouvrait la porte de la chambre, il dit, Yvette, rentre dedans première. Gros argent avec elle. Go to work, boys, go to work. Là, on partit, on s'en allait, c'est nous. On appelait ça les charivari pour le deuxième mariage.
Tell me about les cochons.
Les cochons. Mon père avait un magasin, mais il travaillait, il n'aimait pas travailler dans le magasin, il avait quelqu'un qui courait du magasin tout le temps. Papa aimait aller dans le bois. Il avait amassé des cochons, il avait des bêtes. On a un portrait avec lui, avec lui et sur son cheval, avec son chien. Son chien, on l'appelait Snow. Une fois, j'étais avec lui. C'est pour marquer des petits cochons qui étaient dans le bois. Il avait des cochons à différentes places dans le bois. Quand on arrivait où à peu près les cochons étaient, les mères des cochons, quand on avait des petits cochons séparés, la bande de cochons, elle allait elle tout seule. Ça, c'était l'ouvrage à Snow. Pape disait, Snow, va trouver la maman de ce petit cochon-là. Snow partait, commençait à about, he would start barking up, Papa would say, il y a des cochons par là, alors. So we get to the on parle comme ça, le mot en anglais, quelques mots en français, c'est beaucoup plus aisé pour nous autres dire ça on veut. Quand on arrivait là, le petit cochon, it would leave the mother and run in the bushes, different places. Et Papa disait à Snow, va trouver les petits cochons. Snow partait là, il trouvait un petit cochon, il mettait ses deux pas devant ce petit cochon, il gardait là jusqu'à Papa arrivait. En même temps, la mère voulait mordre. Papa, bon, ça avec un gros pôle, puis je la quittais away from Papa. Papa prenait le petit cochon, le mettait entre ses deux jambes, et il avait un couteau qui coupait bien. Il coupait les oreilles du petit cochon, il marquait. Il bout de coupé, ça coupait le bout de l'oreille, l'oreille droite. Un trou, je faisais un petit trou dans l'oreille, une coche dessus, il make a little loop on top of the ear, une coche dessous, il coupait dessous l'oreille. Et l'autre oreille a pointé, il mettait the pointed ear. Quand le petit cochon lâchait le petit cochon, et il courait là-bas, il rejoindre sa mère. Si c'était une femelle, il l'a laissé comme ça. Si c'était un petit mâle, il tournait, et puis là, il l'a rangé. So we could eat the meat. If you don't fix the little pig, cut some parts of it up, you can't eat the meat. You know. Il marquait tous les petits cochons. S'il y en avait plus que 5 ou 6 cochons, on prenait les autres petits cochons, les emmenait tourner à notre maison. On mettait ça avec du maïs et tout, jusqu'à qu'ils viennent plus gros. Et là, we would use that for our regular pork meat that we use. On appelait ça des petits cochons de lait. And that was the big meat for Christmas. In Bordelon, we went out, si longtemps que j'étais petit, j'ai jamais vu une fois qu'on a cuit un dinde pour Christmas. C'était toujours un petit cochon de lait. La moyenne, tu cuis un petit cochon de lait, tu l'ouvres et tu le prends et tu mets un feu devant lui et tu tournes le petit cochon et jusqu'à il cuit. C'est un petit cochon de lait. Il y a un village tout près de Bordelon-Ville, ils appellent ça Mosira. They noted for their roast pig celebration, where they cook, at one time they cook as many as 100 pig at one time.
Tell me about what you guys did on Easter.
What?
On Easter Day.
There's some The Saturday before Easter is usually celebrated by the people of Bordelon here going from one house to the other, knocking eggs. A month before Easter, we start celebrating eggs and picking the strongest one, the one that would be the hardest to break, and setting them aside. Le samedi, before Pâques, on peint des œufs de différentes couleurs. La journée de dimanche de Pâques, le matin, non, le samedi before, avant Pâques, prend chacun 10 ou 12 œufs et on va maison en maison cogner les œufs. Quand tu casses un œuf, it's yours. Then when you break one, it's yours. And you keep that egg. On va maison en maison. Le dimanche, avant la messe, Chirac a des œufs qui n'ont pas été cassés. On se met un grand tuyau ensemble et on cogne jusqu'à il reste juste 2 ou 3 œufs. La messe, la seconde messe, tous ces œufs des œufs qui n'ont pas été cassés avant la première messe, se met ensemble et puis cogne encore. Jusqu'à il y a juste un œuf qui reste. The big prize for the day is a goose egg. That's it. This is a picture of my home in Bordelon, where I was born and raised. The way people built home at that time, there was no such thing as lumber yards close by. The way they used to get that lumber was to go in the woods and select big oak trees that later on would be hauled to a sawmill, maybe 20 or 30 miles away, and cut into the slabs and means and the type of lumber that would be necessary to build that home. The way they would get this log was to go before the flood, select the tree, cut the tree down, and the length that they would use for the lumber to build the house. If it was a long plank that they needed or a steel, they cut a long log. So they would have logs of different length that would be sawed by a sawmill and hauled back home to build a home. When the high water would come, all those logs that they had cut would be close to a trail that they could follow, where they wouldn't have too much trouble in moving the logs and floating the logs back to an opening where the trucks could come up and pick them up. The way they do it, they had a special chain that they could tie 2 of the logs together. They usually took 2 logs about the same length, a short chain, and hooked those 2 logs so they would stay together. One fellow would ride the front part of the log and the other one the back part, using a long pole with a hook on it. They would take that log and float it in that trail to a road that later on, when the water would recede, they could come back to that area and load the logs and take them to a sawmill. The shingles were worth, you take up one of the logs after it was hauled home and cut the length of this shingles that they would use on the house. You had a special tool. You cut the shingle, you turn the cut the shingle, the width pieces, the width of the shingle, and you use that tool, and you hit with a wooden mallet on the tool. It had a handle where you could bring it back and then take the shingle out. They take all those shingles and they would tie them together so they wouldn't warp and let them dry. And after the house is built, they would have what they call a coup de main. That means that a bunch of people would volunteer and come on a certain day and they would roof the house. Nail all the shingles up. After the carpenter has built the house and the roof, then he puts the roof and then he worked the inside of the house. He built the outside of the house first and then leave the roof. Then you do the roof and then the inside of the house after that. And if you wanted to paint it, not many houses at that time were painted. They were left because they were all made with good shingles, good cypress that would last for years. There are some of the homes today that were built when I was a little boy, and they are in perfect shape. That's a good. That was selected cypress from the swamp where we come from.
Pop, I noticed today that the kids like to cruise up and down in their cars on the street. What did you guys used to do?
Well, in the first place, most of us never had seen a car at that time. So we had to find some pastime, and we did have lots of fun. Some of the things we did, I don't think we do as grown up. I remember 2 or 3 things. We used to meet at night on the levee. We had 2 groups. One on one side of town and the other, they call us V cutters. Our group was known as V cutters. I don't know why we got that name. But in our group, we had one little fellow that we used to pick on all the time. But it's a natural thing to do when you have 10 boys together. There's one in there you pick on for some reason or other. So one time, just before All Saints Day, we met all but we left this fellow out. He wasn't there that night. We decided to pick on him the next day when the ghost is supposed to be walking. So one fellow said, well, I'm going to bring a sheet. We're going to the cemetery. Where we used to meet was right across, on the left here, right across the cemetery. He said, I'm going to go hide in the cemetery up there with my sheet. And y'all get Joe and pick on him and make him move in my direction. I'll take care of it. So we got a long ball of twine. And one fella tied the end of that twine while we were talking and playing on the levee. Said, let's go see if the ghost came out. So we tied one end of the twine on that ball, and we start walking. And he kept, the fellow who tied it, kept the rest of the ball in his hand. So when we got up there, we had a whistle that we used to recognize, when one wanted to recognize and tell something, we had different ways of whistling. You use 2 fingers and put it in your mouth and blow it and you get the whistle. You ever do that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we whistle it and mean put your sheet on. You put the sheet and then it says, I think I see a ghost up there. And about that time he started moving with his sheet on his head. And Joe said, oh yeah, man, see, let's leave, let's go. So he started off and then he let that twine unwind on that bowl, and when he was about 10 or 15 yards away from it, he pulled on the string, and Joe looked back down there, didn't see anybody. He says, the ghost got me, I'm gone. And he started running, and we started pulling the string. He nearly died. That's it.
Tell me about some of the chores you used to have to do.
The what?
The chores. Some of the stuff you used to have to do around the house and in the field. And
when we live in the country, there's always something to do, especially when we had a high water every other year at least. And after the high water, one side of the levee, we had a levee around the bayou, you know that, and one side wouldn't flood each year. So the part that would flood, we had to replant everything when the water would go down. 1927, the levee broke and both sides of the bayou went underwater. In a yard at home in 1927, she can give you that in print. We had 12 feet of water, and we had to replant. And the only thing after that water goes down, it's too late to plant cotton again or corn. We usually plant peas. We call it velvet bean. It was a bean that was very good for cattle. And we plant the whole field with velvet bean and then put the cattle in that to feed. There's always something to do when we get to usually the first thing that we do in the spring was to help plant the cotton. And when the cotton would come up to about 2 inches, and then we hoe, the first hoeing, we thin the cotton out and space the cotton about 15 inches apart, about 24 inches apart, and leave one plant. And as always grass growing, so we had to hoe 2 or 3 times. In the meantime, we were going to school. And when cotton would open up, there's no machinery to pick it except your hand. Early in the morning, at daybreak, we'd go in the field and pick a sack of cotton and come back, eat breakfast, walk to school. Where we were living, we lived about 2 miles from school. Hurry back after school, come home, and pick another about 2 sacks, depending on how much cotton was there. At night, there's no such thing as electricity. First electricity I saw, the first light that I saw was in Alexandria when I was playing basketball. In that, I remember there was a bulb, but one little fella tried to blow the thing all night long. But he was used to do a lantern at home and a light and a lamp. We would do our homework using a lamp, and hot as it was, there's lots of mosquitoes. No such thing as a screen either. We did have pencil and paper. We were out of the age where they were using slate. The water, no running water, except we every house had one or two cisterns, and we had gutters. When it would rain, we'd let some first water go out, and then the rest of the water we'd connect it, put the gutter in, so we could have water to drink and wash. The well water could not be used for washing because it wouldn't dissolve the soap. The only soap that we had was we made. Mama made her own soap. She kept the fats of different kind of fat, and then we'd use the lime, the ashes from the wood that we would burn, and soak the. She had the process. I don't know exactly how she made it, but she used the ashes and the fat to make her soap. For ice, there was no such thing as ice. When I was a little older, I guess by the time I was in high school, there was a fella would come about every 2-3 days. Well, not that often, about twice a week with ice. Down the road, we'd go by a block of ice, and we'd have our Papa had made a ice box by putting sand between two layers of wood to insulate it, and we keep the ice in there. Before that, we used to take out all our food that we wanted to preserve for a day or two, put it in a bucket, and put a brick at the end, back inside of the bucket, and then close the bucket with the food, and then drop it in a well so it would go to the bottom and let it stay in the well for there as long as, well, we could leave it in there. For instance, if you would take raw meat and you keep it about 2-3 days at the bottom of the well, and then pick it up and then use it. We raise most of our food. We have a big garden, and we keep do lots of preserving. Mama would preserve lots of figs. I guess about 50 or 60 gallons of figs. We had lots of fig trees. And had those big black pots that we used to make preserves. And we'd feel that we didn't have sugar unless we'd use lots of syrup. All of us, all the farmers had a patch of sugar cane, and each little town had a mill. We'd take those canes and run them through the crushers, get the juice, and then boil down the juice until to a certain thickness, the way we want it. People liked it, the way some liked it thin, some of them a little thicker. So the sellers would cook them to them, and you'd tell them when to stop. And then we'd put it in a gallon bucket and seal them. And as we needed them, we just, same thing we do with pigs. We had such thing as boucherie d'habitants. That's a family butchery. So many of the farmers would get together, and you'd get, let's say, 15 farmers would say, I belong to that group. And when, but twice or 3 times a year, one of that group would butcher for the whole bunch of them. And that's when we call it the big butchery. It killed maybe 20 hogs at one time. You clean them, and you make your cracklings, and you have the sausage, the crackling, the boudin, and some of them would cut the meat and grind it to make the sausage. The others would clean the sausage. They all meet at one place that day. And then when they'd go home, they would divide all of the meat. And you usually went home with some sausage, cracklings, and boudin. Two kinds of boudin. They call it the red boudin or white boudin. And all the women would be, they'd make, the one of them would cook the rice, and the other would clean the sausage, the intestines. They used the intestine of the pigs to make the sausage. There wasn't a such thing as artificial casing at that time. You had to use the pig and you clean all that. Usually they would kill the pig one day and pick a cold next day. If the weather prediction, and you didn't have TVs and radio prediction, you get the old fellows who used to look at the sky and say it's going to rain tomorrow or it's going to be cold tomorrow, how cold it'd be, so many degrees, and they were usually right. And they'd take all that pigs that they killed and hang them outside so that they'd be cold the next day and it'd be easy to cut. And the man would do one thing and the women, when it came to fill the intestines with, they had a special grinder that you grind the meat at the same time when it come out, you had a place to put the sausage, the intestine, and it would fill the intestine. Well, man would usually do that part because it's a little harder than the other, while the women were cooking rice and cooking, also they would cut make the crackling, cut the meat to make the crackling. The man would do the cook and do that part. The harder work the man did, the cleaning the pigs and things of that sort, the cooking part of it, except cracklings. The way to make the crackling, they put in those big black pots, hold about 15, 20 gallons at one time, and then cook that and use a paddle for the spoon to move the cracklings.
But Pop, tell me about your grandfather who was in the Civil War.
During the Civil War, our section of the country knew very little about slavery. The few blacks that we had most of them worked for us, for the white, and became very close as a member of that family. They did live separate from the white. They had one section, usually on the other side of the levee, where most of the blacks and the few blacks were there. They were treated very much like a white. The slavery part was not in our section. They had about 30 miles, and that was a long ways at that time. Those that had slavery had built Alexandria was one. It's still some of those little houses. Each family had a little house. The most 2 rooms. And they would use these, they would bring the food to them, uncooked. And they had, well, they had three rooms. One is a kitchen, a small kitchen where they cook, and then 2 to sleep in. In our section, I can talk more about that because I wasn't too familiar with the other. When I saw those little homes, it's places that I saw in Alexandria and in Arab Bunkie. They had 2 big plantations, and They worked the whole plantation, and one fella was overseer of the thing. I don't know too much about that, but I do know how to handle in my part of the country. I used to pick cotton with them. They were treated as a member of the family. They didn't sleep in our home. They didn't eat with us either. But other than that, we worked together, played together. Except on baseball, I don't think any one of them ever played. They used to like to fish, and I joined them most of the time. So when the war was declared, they came to our section of the country and enlisted these people, and it didn't make any difference whether you had children or not. It took you, brought you to fight for slavery. They didn't know what they were fighting for. My grandfather had a family of 5. He lived way in the woods. It took him very little training. I don't think he ever had a gun in his hand before. And it took him to Virginia. And when the war was over, they just left him. You had to get back home the best you could. And he had lost an eye and was hit in the hand, and he had lost three fingers. He had 2 fingers, the index finger, the 2 fingers left on his left hand, I remember. And his wife was left with 5 children. None of them, well, I guess the oldest was about 12. The closest neighbor was about 5 miles from her home. How did they live? They made a crop of corn. They take that corn and they put it in a special bag that they had, and they take a stone, a rod, a big rod, and beat that corn until it got to the size of cornmeal. And then they had a little strainer that they got in, and a bigger part, they made, what they call it, the cook is different. He grew at grits. They made grits and cornmeal and some other things. But that was the main things for bread. There's no such thing as flour for bread. And corn, they either made cornbread or what we call couscous. How do you make couscous? You use cornmeal and water and cook it until it's eatable. And they had a cow, and when the cow, somebody else would let her have another cow when that wasn't milkable. When it stopped giving milk, then you take one that has a little calf, and then you let the calf suck a little bit, and then you milk it. Right next to where she lived, it had a big swamp. In that swamp, they had quite a few deserters. When they found out these fellas was coming or better get them, they take off and go in the woods, and they stay in the woods during the war. For 5 years, she lived by herself up there, and these people would come at night and take her chicken. She was raising chickens and pigs also to get something to eat. And if she had some corn, they'd come in and steal some of her corn. But she battled that. And so when the war was over and he was in Virginia, he made his way up to Shreveport. And when he got in Shreveport, he got sick, got pneumonia. Old lady took care of him, and she wrote a letter, went to his wife, and when his wife got his letter, she couldn't read. There was only one person in Bordelonville at that time that could read. And so they found out where he was. So two of his brothers took a wagon and put a bed in the wagon. Took two mules and hitched to the wagon. And it took them a month to go to Shreveport and back. And they brought him back home. He was still sick, but he stayed there a while and then he got well. I remember seeing he used to like to ride a horse, but in order for him to get on the horse, we had to move him close to a high place, and he'd get us on the steps and get on the porch, and we'd get the horse next to the porch, and he'd get on the... I remember he stayed with his family until he died, and then Papa had a little store at that time. We furnished him all the food he wanted to and his family. People used to work together. Is that Mom in there?
Yeah. I'm videotaping.
When we was staying up, and he was sleeping up at night going up. And he used to ride a bicycle. Didn't have a car. We didn't know what cars were in the first place. And he had a tree right in front of the place that we used to climb and then bend and then let it go. So we went up one night, we found it, look, his bicycle was right under the tree. So one fellow climbed up there, and we got a rope and then tied his bicycle at the top of the tree, and we let it go. The next morning, when he got out, he couldn't find his bike. He didn't know where it was. So somebody went by his house. He said, "Well, I know where you got your bike on top of that tree." He said, "What tree?"
What tree?
We never did see him at that house anymore.
So that's the TV thing, no?
In French or in English?
Either way.
Either in English.
Okay.
I lived in a little town in Boyles Parish, Bordelonville. Wasn't large enough to have a policeman, but we had a constable. That was on the parish level, but he was paid by the parish, and he played the part of the policeman in Bordelonville. We used to try to give him all kind of trouble so he would earn his money. The only car he had two wheels. We call it a bicycle. So he couldn't chase us very far because we'd go in the dirt, and he could paddle in the dirt. He'd get down and run after us, but he'd always outrun. We found out later that there was this old widow in town that he used to visit at night, and his wife didn't know a thing about it. So one night while he was at the house, we looked, his bike was parked by a tree, right, a small tree by the house. The type of tree we used to climb at the top and then spring out and bend it and then let it go, and it was an old, small cypress tree. We used to do that in the woods when we wanted to cross a creek. We'd find a little cypress right next to the edge of the creek, and then we'd climb that and then bend the tree to go on the other side, and one fellow would stay on the same side of the tree so he could come and meet us. So he could bend it and get us back on the other side also, because the tree was strong enough to carry two at one time. So that night we looked at his bicycle, and one of us said, you know, that bike would look good at the top of the tree. So we got a new rope. One of the boys climbed the tree and bent it, and the rest of us, we tied the bicycle to the top of that tree. And he let it go and went up to it. He got out and he looked around. He never did think that his bike would be on the top of a tree. So he walked back home. And his wife wanted to know where he'd been so long. It took him, he lived with a pretty good way in town, out of town. So 2 or 3 days after that, some fella went by his house. He says, well, what in the world has happened to your bicycle? I saw it on top of a tree and so it was a house. I said, you did? Don't say that to too many people. I'll get it down. So he got somebody to climb up and got his bike. He never did give us any trouble anymore. He knew who had done that. That's the way that young generation used to pass the time. Things of that sort. I remember one time we took one of those boats that we used to move cattle in, and we took that boat when the current was moving pretty rapidly. We went from house to house and loaded with all the young calves, with the calves that the people were using to milk the cow. See, the way we used to milk the cow was to let the calf start the milk by sucking one or two of the tits, and then the milk would come, and then we'd get rid of the calf, and then we'd milk the cow. Usually, people would do that the first thing in the morning. As soon as they get up, they get the cow from the outside. You let it come in, let the calf start the thing. So we went down the road, down the river, the bayou, and loaded the boat with a bunch of those little calves from house to house. And we closed the gate on the boat, and we untied, let the boat go down the current, and it moved about a mile down the river. Fellas, next morning, all along that bayou, went to milk the cow, no calf. And they finally found the outfit. When they found out who did it, we had to haul all of the boats back and put the calves back in place. Put the little calves in place. We didn't know who the little calf, but the owners knew. As soon as we get to a place, they'd get the cow, and the little calf would run to the mother. All kind of ways to keep busy. They use different things now, altogether different.
How old were you when you started learning English?
All of us, I don't think there's one that ever started school who knew maybe a word or two in English.
Uh-huh.
Papa was running the little store, and the first day of school, Mama gave me an apple, and she says, this is home. You say that in English, apple, apple. So when I went back to school the next day, I hit the apple in my hand, and I went to the teacher. She says, home. That's the first word I learned was apple, but I missed on it from the first time I used it. Here's the way the people in that section later on got educated. In instead of having a schoolhouse or having a school, regular school, they had traveling teachers. And use that in Kaplan also. Most of the things that we did in Bordelonville, the same thing was being done in other sections of the country. This traveling sales teacher would come in Bordelonville, and one of the residents would let him stay at his house. And people who wanted an education would go to that house and make arrangements of the subjects that he wanted to take and how much he would pay for it. That teacher would live at that home, and we would go to that house and take lessons from that teacher. He would stay maybe 4 or 5 months, then another one would come, and it kept going year round. Papa started off with him and went through the 5th grade. And he was able to, after getting to, Papa had a handwriting I never could come close to write like you. Beautiful. And that's one thing that this fella did. Everybody had to have a good handwriting by the time he got through with it. You made letters very slowly, not a quick deal.
Yeah. Very
slow, every letter, and it had to be uniform. The size of those letters had to be uniform. I don't think they went much higher than the 5th grade. But from that, Papa went and worked in a store for general merchandise in Morroville. He worked 2 years up there, and then he came to Bordelonville and moved to Bordelonville. No, he was living in Bordelonville then, but he opened a store on his own. But he didn't like to work in it. He got somebody else. He used to like to be in the open, riding a horse, things like so. He's a good horseman. We used to get all the, during those days they had lots of ticks that they would get on the animals. And so they had a federal program at that time, and they built vats with some fluid in that would kill the ticks. And so what we had to do, I think it's once a month, I don't remember the time, we had to run up all of the cattle and then drive them in there and let them jump in that vat and swim out, and then we drive them back to the grazing place. But when we would go get the cattle, run the cattle, there was one bull, and that was the champion fighter with the group that he was at charge of. That's the way cattle do. They divide into group. One bull was to take care of about 15, 20, maybe 30 cows. You have to, the way you get good cattle from there was to get a good bull, buy an extra bull, and just one bull to handle so many. Mm-hmm. And if you get 2 of them together, they're going to fight head to head until one beats the other one, and that one has to leave. And so when we get all those cattle together, we had lots of fun watching those bulls fight. Because when 2 of them, they keep on digging with that front part, and then they back up about 4 or 5 yards, and then they bump heads. Bang, bang. You keep doing that until one pushes the other one away, and then he goes with his group. That was one of the things we like to do when we get the cattle, to separate the 2 bulls and put them together from 2 sections and let them fight.
I heard you tell once about your father's store and how underneath they kept the cream.
Papa had a warehouse and he kept all the extra food, extra produce. And all the houses and all the stores and things of that sort that had were built about 4 feet from the ground, because when the water would come, some years you just have about 6 inches, 7, 8 inches, maybe a foot of water. And if your floor was above that, you wouldn't hurt the house.
Yeah.
So this store, when Papa built it, he made it about 4 feet higher than the other one. So during the summer, when it was so hot, we used to play underneath the stove. And Mama used to do lots of sewing. I would take all of these, what's called knobs, spoon, and I'd put some nails up there, and I put a spoon in the big nail and it could spin. And I had all kind of contraption on it. I had a little pulley, and I had a little drag line and things of that sort. And that's why lots of those little colored fellas would come in there. We'd play under the stove and make all the kind of contraption with the spoons, and pulley here, and carry one thing from one place to another, then dump it over here, and then bring it back with a little scraper. So I loved this condensed milk, sweet condensed milk. And they used to come in little cans, I guess about a half a cup, with each little can. So I dug me a little hole in the floor in the warehouse. So I'd go in the warehouse and I'd dump me 2 or 3 of those little cans, and I'd get underneath the stove. Papa couldn't figure what the world was happening. I love that thing. The way I would eat it, I'd make 2 holes in the can, and I'd suck the thing up. Yep. Long time ago. Did I tell you about where this lady found out my age the other day?
No.
That happened last 2 weeks, Easter. Easter, the Fletcher Land Company had a meeting in Natchitoches. Sarah and I went for 2 days. We spent in Natchitoches. We spent 2 days at the Holiday Inn. While we were at the Holiday Inn, this lady come up and she met us, and we talked about different things. And she had charge of the food at the Holiday Inn when they had banquets and things. She was a character in this Magnolia, a movie that they made in Natchitoches.
Yeah, Steel Magnolias.
What is it?
Steel Magnolias?
Steel?
Yeah, Steel Magnolias.
Steel Magnolias. She is a character. So the second day she come up and she says, BJ, I can tell your age. I said, you can? Yeah. She says, the only thing, you just do what I tell you, and then I'll be able to tell your age. So I'm sitting on the sofa. So I figured she'd make me stand up, so I eased right to the edge of the sofa, so I could get up on the first bounce. And while I was up there, she comes up there, she says, stand up. So I was right at the edge. Man, I jumped the first time I made it. She says, raise your right hand. Raise her right hand. Put it down. Up. She tells me I'm 60. She says, stand up. No, she says, turn around. So I got close to the wall in case I would fall or lean back. So I turned around. She says, you're going to be 88 next week. I said, how in the hell can you tell my age just by doing that? Says, you told me yesterday how old you were. She was a character. Here's another one she told me. She says, all the country stores have a bench in front of the store where the farmers used to go up and talk about the crops and different things. And up in North Louisiana, there's the bench, and right next to it, there's a bucket where they spit, because all of them are snuffed. And this fella has his knife and he's cutting the big old dog is right close by, up sitting on the ground, half asleep, and he's cutting the some fancy fella comes in, a salesman, and he drives his car, and he says, how you fella doing? Good. He says, that damn dog of yours, does he bite? Fella, never did bite anybody. My dog don't bite people. So the fella moves out. The old fella said, get him. Dog jumped up and he grabbed the fella by the leg. Ooh, he tore his pants. Say, didn't you tell me that your dog don't bite? He said, that's not my dog. That's not my dog. John, you know that Kaplan, Bordelon have more hunters and people from all over the country come in this area to hunt, especially a few years back. There was a place between Kaplan and Bordelon, way in the marsh, where a Chinese bought a section of land, and he built a big house right there. He had a family from this section of the country move in there, run his house when he wasn't there. And he left. He sold the house to somebody, I don't know. But the people who were running the place were bad. The man died, and the old lady didn't want to leave. She loved that country because she loved to hunt herself. Two fellas from Lafayette went hunting in that area. And the only way you could get to that house was to go in a canal, in a boat in that canal, leave your boat, and then go shoot, kill the ducks or geese or anything you wanted, and then come back and get in your car. So these two fellas went up there, and while they were getting that night, that afternoon, a northerner came through, and they couldn't leave. Wind was blowing, it was ice cold. Let's walk to this house, see if we can stay up there. So they walked, and the lady come up there. She said, can I help? Said, we'd like to spend the night here. Would it be possible? We pay you. But cost you anything. I know you can't get back with this storm coming through. So they went in there, and she had some gumbo made, and they ate gumbo. She says, I'll sleep upstairs. But just before they left, they were talking on the porch. Two teal ducks come back. She grabbed their gun, and they came back again, flying, bang, bang. She knocked both of them. Boy, the fellow says she can handle them. So when they went to bed that night, she says, I'm going to sleep upstairs. I'll bring my dog upstairs too. And she had the dog to go get the ducks and bring them. And he doesn't talk, but he listens. Anything I wanted him to. You notice how he went to get the ducks. Yep. He stood there, he said, I don't worry. I'm not going upstairs, no damn well. So, next morning, they left early before she got up. About 9 months after that, fellow meets the other one. He said, Joe, he says, at night we spent at that house in the Marshall. Did you go upstairs that night? He says, I hate to tell you I did. He says, you sure? Yeah. Did you use my name? Yeah, I did. I said, why in the world you asked me that? He says that old lady died and she left everything she had to me.
No, I'm fixing. I haven't done it. It would be foolish to
Why?
It would be foolish to go get anything else. I have lots left over from last night. So I am taking and
Did you go get some stuff?
we did have no need to.
Well, that's what I was trying to tell you. What?
Fix them. I'm going to fix your tomatoes and lettuce.
Why the tomato?
It's all fixed. Everything's fixed. I know I can't keep them.
Oh,
Making biscuits. Fixing breakfast. Going to church. We have a wonderful minister. He's more like the minister that was in Ruston when I was a little girl. Mr. McFadden came home when I was about 11 years old, 12 years old. His first Sunday in Ruston was really a Sunday that I shall never forget. Are you recording?
Yep.
Sunday school had been preparing, Sunday school teachers had been preparing for him for many weeks. My Sunday school teacher was Mrs. Graham, next door neighbor. Loved the group who was supposed to join the church the Sunday that Mr. McFadden came. It was Mr. Bell's last Sunday. Mr. Bell had a daughter my age. He was being moved to another location. We all hated to see Bessie leave. That was his daughter. She was working just as I. We had to learn the books of the Bible. We had to know the 10 Commandments. We had to be able to recite all those. There were different verses in the Bible that we had to learn. We had to learn the 23rd Psalm. And we had to recite all of those before Mrs. Graham felt that we were ready to go up to the next. We were primary, I guess, intermediate, and we were going up to a high intermediate class. I was looking forward to going up, and Mrs. McLeese, our next door neighbor, my sister-in-law's mother, was to be my teacher, and I had loved Miss McLeese. I loved Mrs. Graham also, our present teacher, and she was so sweet and gentle and kind to all of us. I hated to leave Miss Graham, but I was looking forward to having Mrs. McLeese as a teacher. I knew that Frances and Mrs. McLeese did not always get along. Frances interpreted many things her way of interpreting, and she would argue with Mrs. McLeese. Mrs. McLeese was an elderly lady, and Frances would sometimes forget that she was an old lady, and she insisted on having her interpretation being interpreted to the class. I was all ready. We were all excited. Mr. McFadden was there. He was then only about 27 years old. He was a bachelor. He had not married. Very, very nice looking. We knew he had one eye. There was a glass eye. Of course, that fascinated us, for we had never seen anyone with a glass eye before. We left Sunday school class and assembled in the assembly room, all the Sunday school classes together. Mr. Graham, who was then the head of, I don't know what you would call him, but at any rate, he was head of the Sunday school. He called us all to order, and we sang a song. And then he told us, he introduced us to Mr. McFadden. And he told us that Mr. Bell was leaving at the end of the service. He was being transferred. And that our future minister would be Mr. McFadden. And of course, we all just looked at Mr. McFadden. And we just thought he was the most wonderful looking person we had ever seen in our lives. We were all excited because we did have him as our new minister. Mr. McFadden, Mr. Graham then explained to the Sunday school as a whole and said, today we are having a class who will be joining the church. And he said, we will play the hymn in the garden. And as we play the hymn, the students who will join the church today will come forward. I looked back and I told Frances, who was sitting back of me in Mrs. McLeese's class, I said, Frances, I am joining. Frances shook her head and said, no, you are not to join the church. You are going to join the Baptist church. I said, I'm not. I'm joining the church. Mrs. McLeese and Mrs. Graham saw that we were having a little argument. And Miss McLeese took Frances and said, Frances, stop. And Miss Graham said, Sarah, what's the matter? I said, Frances doesn't want me to join the church. And I said, Miss Graham, I've been preparing to join the church now for several months. I want to join. She said, well, you go ahead and you join the church today. So one by one, the students, there were about 15 of us, one by one, the students got up, went down the aisle and shook hands with Mr. Graham and Mr. McFadden and Mr. Bell. I was the last one left in my seat. And I turned to Frances and I said, I am going. Frances shook her finger at me and says, don't you dare. I said, I am. I went forward. I didn't know what was happening exactly back of me, but I did kind of look back and I see Frances right behind me shaking her hand. The whole congregation, the whole Sunday school was there seeing her. Mrs. McLeese was right back of her. She was shaking her hand with Frances. I shook hands with Mr. Graham, and he squeezed my hand. I shook hands with Mr. McFadden. He patted me on the shoulder. I shook hands with Mr. Bell, and I said, I'm sorry you're leaving. I said, we're going to miss Bessie, and I went on back into the room where we were assembled, those who were going to join the church. Mr. Graham came in. He said, Sarah, I'm sorry, honey. He didn't say honey because that would have killed him. To have said such a thing as that, I made an error there. He said, Sarah, we're sorry. You won't be able to join today. I said, Mr. Graham, I want to join. He said, I know you do. We're going to come talk to you. We're going to go talk with your mother, and you'll join next Sunday. So I had to leave my group and go sit back out in the assembly room. Then when they dismissed everyone, I walk out. Frances says, you are going to stay for church. I said, I'm not going to stay for church. I'm going home. She says, no, you're not going home. And she pushes me into the church and makes me sit down. She leaves so she could get home and tell her story to Mama and Papa. But when I got home, I opened the door and I said, okay, I didn't get to join the church. I'm going to be a sinner. And I'm never going to join the church. Never. And I walked through the house, I slammed the back door, and I went outside. Papa and Mama both heard Frances' story. Papa turned to Frances. He said, Frances, you did something that you shouldn't have done. He says, no, Sarah is not going to join the Baptist church. Sarah is going to be a Presbyterian, just as you and every other member of the family is. But Papa, I thought you wanted her to be a Baptist. He says, no, it was all right for her to go with her little friends and visit the Baptist church. He said if she had wanted to go visit the Methodist church, that would have been all right too. But she said, he told her, he says, now then, Frances, she has to be a Presbyterian. That's what she wants. That's what she'll be. But Papa, you're a Baptist. He says, yes. My parents were Baptists. I was reared in a Baptist community. Sarah is being reared up here on top of the hill where all of her friends, all of our neighbors, are Presbyterians. the wish that that's what she wishes to be. That's what she's going to be. Next Sunday she'll join. Now I was standing downstairs at the foot of the steps, and I yelled up the steps, I won't be a Presbyterian, I won't be a Baptist, and I won't be a Methodist. I'm going to be a sinner. And all of you are going to be sorry for what you did to me. The next day, Mr. McFadden came home. He came out and talked with me. I said, you can talk all you want. I am not joining the church. I said, I will continue coming to church, but I am not joining the church. I am not going to join the church. Next Sunday came. Mama said, it's time to go to church. I said, I'm going to sleep. I'm not going to church. I'm not going to Sunday school. Mama said, Sarah, you get out of that bed and you're going to Sunday school. I'm not. Well, she felt maybe it was best not to push me. So she says, all right, if you want to stay here with me, that's all right, we'll cook dinner. I didn't help her cook dinner, but I did help her clean the kitchen afterwards. I sure hated to miss church. All my friends were there. But I was stubborn. I said, I'm not going to. I didn't join the church for about 2 or 3 years. But during that time, Mr. McFadden, he'd get a little closer and be a little nicer. He never came home without coming to see about me. He was always interested in what I was doing. He married in the meantime, and Mrs. McFadden kind of took me under her wing. It was so nice, so sweet and nice to me, and finally, I went ahead and joined. It did do a lot to me, though. It hurt me terribly. That's it.
Tell me about what you used to do when you were younger for fun. What would you guys do when you had some free time?
We didn't have very much free time. Mama liked to work in the yard, and she kept us all. We had to do most of the housework, but I don't ever remember being without help. The help wasn't always too efficient, but we usually had help. We lived in a pretty large house, and it was on an acre. Mama had a big garden. We had a cow, and when I was a little girl, we didn't have central heat, even gas stoves. We had wood. The wood had to be brought in. Our house was built, front was at the top of the hill, and the back sloped down, and we had 16 or 17 back door steps. The wood had to be brought in, up the back door steps, which were about 17 steps. We didn't have a lot of money. I look back, and I guess we did have a pretty good, we had more money than a lot of people. But we spent our money on books and things. We didn't spend it foolishly. But Mama was a hard worker. Papa was a lawyer, but that was the beginning of the Depression when I came along, all the way through high school, through college, was the height of the Depression. Mama would buy, to begin with, when Guy left home when I was in about the 6th grade, he had finished his 2 years at Tech. At that time, Tech was just a 2-year college. And he had finished his 2 years, and he was going to LSU to school. Before he left to go to school, he called me in the yard one day, and he said, Sarah, I'm fixing to leave. You're going to have to start doing the work that I do. Frances had a backache. She always had a backache. She lived with a backache. Or Kathleen had a stomach ache. She had acidosis, I think is what they called it in that day and time. She was the last in the family and had always been puny. She couldn't do any hard work, and Frances couldn't do any hard work. Frances did like to keep the house. She'd go around with a mop, kind of mop around, and she would pick up and hang up. But Kathleen didn't do much of anything. But God told me, he says, now you're going to have to take over the outside work. So I said, He said, come on, I'll go teach you how to cut a piece of wood. We had a axe with the double blade. I'd never had an axe in my hand before. He said, you have to learn how to sling this axe because Mama buys wood by 3/4 of the time. It's a little bit too long for the kitchen stove, and we use blocks for the stove in the back room, and they're usually too big to go into the stove. You have to split them. So you're going to have to learn how to use this axe. For about 3 or 4 days, every afternoon after school, he'd take me in the backyard and make me cut the wood, use the axe, and I soon got pretty good at it. It took about 6 armloads of stove wood for the big iron stove that Mama had in the kitchen. The stove had the top ovens, and it had the warming ovens at the top, and it had a big oven, and at the side was a place where you heated the water. You didn't have any, we didn't have any thing to heat the water other than at the stove. And you had to bring in enough wood for breakfast. Dinner was our main meal, which was at noon. And for supper, we usually had a hot supper. And I had to bring in enough wood for those 3 meals. Then it got cold. The climate was much colder then than it is now in the wintertime. I had to bring in enough of the wooden blocks. We had a great big thing that you brought up the steps with wooden blocks in. What was that called? A scuttle? It was a great big thing that you held up. And you had, I guess I had to bring in about 8 or 10 of those for that wood stove. Then on weekends, Mama always built a fire in the fireplace in the living room. That wood was stacked in a different place. It wasn't put in the wood house. It was stacked under the sycamore tree. And I could bring that in through the side door, so I didn't have as many steps to climb. When it was real cold, our next door neighbor was Mrs. Smith. And at that time, she was a widow, and she had no one else living with her, and she had a great big house. Oftentimes when it was real cold, Mama would say, well, you know, Sarah, I'm afraid for Miss Smith to go up and down those steps. She says, would you go? I'd say, well, I'll go take our wood in. I'd go take all Miss Smith's wood. I'd get back home and Mom would say, well, you know, Miss McLeese is over there too by herself. Well, I'll go take in Miss McLeese's wood too. Invariably, when I got to Mrs. McLeese's, she'd say, Sarah, I don't have any milk and I don't have any bread. Would you mind running to the bakery shop, which was a half a mile away? Would you mind running to the bakery shop and getting me a loaf of bread and go across and get me a quart of milk? Oh, I'd be glad to. Let me go home and get my skates. I'd go home and get my skates. Off I'd go. It was a good chance for me to visit my friends along the way. Usually they were out in front skating, and we'd all skate a few minutes, and then I'd get back to Mrs. McLeese. Sometimes she gave me a nickel for doing all of that. Sometimes she didn't have the nickel to give me. I don't ever remember Miss Smith giving me anything for doing hers. But I do remember Mrs. Allen, we lived at the top of one hill, and Mrs. Allen lived at the top of another hill, so I had to go down the hill and up. She had wanted Mama to send her a pint of our milk. And I think she paid a dime for it. Sometimes she'd give me a nickel. I saved those nickels. We didn't like candy. All our little group that ran around together liked to buy a pickle. One of those great big pickles, dill pickles that were found in the bottom of a barrel. Mm-hmm. I can remember all of us, we'd come back at noon. We had a whole hour off at noon. And when we'd come back at noon, we'd go to Terrell's store, but they wouldn't go on the school ground till we all got there. And we'd go to Terrell's store and each buy a we would take all the pickles up to one of the girls' room in this dormitory, and we'd eat dill pickles, and maybe sometimes they would have crackers, and they'd share their crackers, and we would share our dill pickles. For amusement, we played at night under the arc light. That was the street light, but we called it then the arc light. All the children in the neighborhood would congregate in front of our house for the arc light in front of the house in the street. There were no cars, very few cars that ever came up and down the street, so we really were able to play. We'd play hide and seek, every game that you could possibly think of. Along about 7:15, Miss Kathleen Graham, our next door neighbor who was head of the library out at Tech, would start playing her piano. And she played 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We'd continue playing, and about 7:30, at 8:15, Mr. Graham would come into they had a formal parlor. He'd come into the parlor, raise the window, and he would start singing. The minute we would hear him come to the parlor, we'd all run, jump the fence, sit down underneath the window of the parlor and listen to him sing. He had the most beautiful voice. And as long as he was singing, we stayed real quiet. We loved to hear him sing. Sometimes, he always knew we were out there. I guess he was singing to us. Sometimes he would invite us in, give us lemonade. He did teach us how to do many of the old-timey square dances. We learned the Virginia reel. I don't know the names of the other dances, but he did teach us how to do that. And he taught us to hold our heads up and to hold erect. And he tried to teach us to be very graceful. He was a beautiful dancer. And he had a lot of patience with us. Miss Kathleen would play the tunes for us, and Mr. Graham would tell us, he'd call it out for us. I was very happy that he had taught me the Virginia reel. For the first year I was teaching, I had to put on a program, and I taught my class how to do the Virginia reel. There was a Mr. Baker out in the country between here and Gaydon, and he could play the violin, and he came and played the violin for us. And the children who were in the dance had their costumes. The little girls had long dresses, and the little boys had the knee bridges and the little frocktail coats, and they looked adorable. And the dance really had gone over big with the school. On Saturdays, I guess all of our mothers in the neighborhood up and down the street were glad to get rid of us. They'd get up fried chicken and fix sandwiches. We'd start out, we'd go walking. We usually walked out to the Talbots, which was about 2 miles, on a dirt road back of Henderson's pasture. And we'd spend the day by a creek that he had. We'd wade and play games. Then when we got tired, we'd come back to the Talbots. They had a Ouija board. And Bessie would pull out the Ouija board, and we'd all tell our fortunes on the Ouija board. Whether there was anything to the Ouija board, whether we pushed it or not, but we all had a big kick out of the Ouija board. Of course, we all wanted a Ouija board, but none of us had a Ouija board. We did that nearly every Saturday from the time I was a little girl till I was a grown girl. We either went there, or Chautauqua, or in Miss Goodwin's pasture, which is now where the Holiday Inn and other stores in Ruston have moved. But at that time, it was just a big pasture with a lot of pine trees, pine needles. We built houses, rooms with the pine needles, and we'd play movie. I remember I was Mary Pickford, and we had a Margaret Clark as we grew older, Mama took the latest home journal. She had Good Housekeeping, The Delineator, and Life, and I don't remember what other magazine. There was Christian something. We had Little Folks as we came along, and there was another magazine, Youth Companion. We read all those magazines. There was always, the Saturday Evening Post. There was always a good continued story in each of the magazines, and when they'd come in, somebody had to sit and read out loud while the rest of us did the work. Usually it was Bill who read to us out loud because she really had a beautiful voice, a good reading voice. And she'd read us the continued stories. Each one of us would look forward to the next week when the magazines would come in. We had a lot of books. I can remember reading. Papa had given me the whole set of the Little Colonel books. Then we had all of Mark Twain's books. We had Louisa May Alcott books. We had, there was a friend of Mama's who lived in Virginia, and she wrote the Miss Minerva and William Greenhill, Billy and the Major. They were darling books, funny, but they were really typical Southern books. Pollyanna grows up. As we grew older, we had the books for our age. As we finished reading our books, we had a cousin down around Montgomery, Uncle Billy's daughter, had polio. And as soon as we would finish with the books, we packed them and sent them to Madge. And Papa made us hurry and read our books. And we used to say, "Oh, but Papa, we want to keep this one." And he'd say, "No, you must learn to share with Madge. Madge is crippled and she's in a wheelchair and she loves to read, so we must send